Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to give it just a couple minutes for folks to hop on board. Thanks for your patience. Hi to all, everybody that has just joined. We're just waiting for a few others to arrive, so give us just about 1 minute. All right, well, that's been a good group. Shasta, do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Of course. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome back and welcome to December. This is our second to last webinar in this series, and so glad you could join us. We have a special guest today, and I'm going to let Angie introduce him for us. And again, just glad you're here and hope the end of your year is not too busy so far. Angie?
All right, welcome back, everybody. We hope you had a nice week so far. This is webinar 9. So this will be this one and one more before we're done with our series. We are on the second part of a 2-part webinar series on an adaptation plan. So if you've been with us the entire time so far, we've gone through all the climate exposures, we've talked through the health impacts of each of them, and we've talked through how to conduct an adaptation, how to conduct a vulnerability assessment. So now we've moved on. Last time we moved on to adaptation planning, which is how we begin to take action on the things that we found in our vulnerability assessment. So we get to start addressing the concerns and threats and risks associated with climate change in our community through an adaptation plan. And last time we were lucky enough to have a guest speaker, and he was talking to us about energy resilience, and that was one way of many, many ways to address some of the health impacts, to try to get ahead of some of the health impacts that might result from climate change. Today, we're super fortunate because we have another guest speaker. And so go ahead and this is, you see him, actually, you see him live. I wasn't sure we were going to get him live, but I hope you all will join me in welcoming Dr. Douglas Walker. He's talking to us today from New Orleans, and he's the Chief Programs Director for Mercy Family Center, and he has more than a couple of decades of really intense, important work in the areas of psychosocial resilience. And so that's an area we've only slightly touched on, but today we're really lucky we get to dive deeply into the concept of how we as humans are psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally affected by the impacts of climate change. And so we are fortunate to have had Dr. Walker with us as part of the Tribal Climate Health Project as an advisor. He's also advised Paula on some of their psychosocial strategies in a publication that we developed together. And he's been a really great resource for us. And he's an expert that speaks all over the world, really, on this topic, and we're happy to have him with us today. He's going to talk to us in just a few minutes after we kind of get our introduction done. So as always, between webinars, we give you a suggested reading. The last one we gave you was the Tribal Climate Adaptation Menu, which actually exists on a website called Forest Adaptation and is authored by several representatives of tribal agencies, including folks from Wisconsin and Michigan. And for folks that did take a look at this Tribal Climate Adaptation Menu, I have a couple of questions that if you want to add your comments and thoughts to the question box. Just wondered if you related to this report. What about it stood out to you? Did any particular strategies that it is suggesting really stand out to you as being potentially very effective for your community? So on the right there, you just, while you guys are adding your comments, on the right is just an image of some, not all of the strategies that are in the Tribal Climate Adaptation Menu. It's a relatively new document, and it's a very thoughtful document. In fact, I just listened to a webinar from the authors recently, and I'll send that along to you guys if you want to take a listen. It's a very collaborative effort to try to do a good job of grabbing tribal perspectives and incorporating them into the process of adapting to climate change, specifically for tribal nations. And so it does a good job of incorporating the importance of relationships for tribal adaptation. And rather than just your general sort of maybe normal list of strategies, it takes a very sort of compassionate, empathetic, humanistic approach to how to address climate change. And so the strategies include approaches as well, so they kind of get down on a more deep level, suggesting how to start adapting. And this quote that's sitting here is just a quotation from the introduction of this reading, and it's just does a nice job of showing you how thoughtful and careful they were about creating this document in a process that was very inclusive and respectful of the tribal communities that were involved, and trying to make it an example, even though they're very aware that not all the cultural traditions can be translated, trying to make it accessible as an example for other tribes around the country as well. So Shasta, did you get any comments?
We do have a comment from ITEP, and I think that's probably Nikki. And she says, I love that there was a lot of reference to animals and plants as relatives, as equals. And I love the tribal language. It's one of my favorites. And yeah, that is so important, because humans, plants, animals, we're all just one together, and we need to be considered together. We got to take care of our relatives too.
Great, thank you, Nikki. Any other comments, Shasta?
Just the one so far.
Okay. So like I said, not your average strategies, but take a look, things like reduce the impact of biological and anthropogenic stressors, support tribal engagement in the environment. So it's a little more process oriented. Sometimes you look at maybe more Western menus of strategies, they might be more infrastructural related or management related. And I just think this is a unique approach, and I actually am hoping once we go to the next iteration of our easy tool that we'll incorporate some of these a bit more now that it's published. Okay, so let's move into the topic of the day. So just as a recap, so we've been through vulnerability assessments, and this is the diagram that we presented just the last time. This is a summary of what we've gone through together through the webinar series, the primary exposures, the secondary exposures, and just a really high-level summary of the potential health impacts of these exposures. And so, like I said, today we really get to do more of a deep dive on mental health, which would include things like increased conflict and aggression, trauma, stress, anxiety, grief, and helplessness. And another way to talk about that is to talk about psychosocial well-being. And so we get to have Doug talk to us about that. And one last thing we're going to do before we have Doug speak is a poll, because I want to know a little bit more about your experiences in this area. So let me go ahead and launch this poll. All All right, you should see it.
Yep.
Okay, actually, can you read that out, Shasta?
Sure. So it's asking, has your tribe experienced trauma, stress, grief, and other impacts to psychological well-being as a result of climate change? And our options are yes, our psychological well-being has been severely affected. Yes, we have had incidents that affected our psychosocial well-being. No, not yet, or I'm not sure.
All right, so I see responses coming in. We'll probably give it another 15 seconds or so, and then we'll close up and share the results.
But I'll do my favorite. I'll have my screaming goat get people's attention. Wait, I gotta try that again. There we go.
All right, we're at 74%. Give it 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close it down.
Ooh, I got a fan answer on the chat. I love the screaming goat. Me too.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right, so here's the results. Sounds like 36% of you have, your community has experienced severe effects. 43% say that you've had incidents that affected your psychological well-being, and 21% say, I'm not sure, which is a very honest response. This is not an area that gets talked about quite as much, but for me, this was an area of the research and literature that was fascinating, and it's growing quickly, and I thought was a really missing piece to the adaptation world. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hide this again and bring up Dr. Douglas Walker. So I already introduced Dr. Walker just a bit. Like I said, he's been invaluable to our work, and we're lucky to have him here today. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about his professional background as well. But welcome, Dr. Walker.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. So
you take it from here.
I'll take the wheel. So yes, I'm sitting here in New Orleans, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm excited to be able to talk to you about mental health, in particular with this concept called psychosocial or psychosocial well-being, because and I really don't joke about this. I really don't want people to come to me because I am a psychologist. I prefer people to be out and healthy and doing the things that they need to do. So my job is to really what we call get upstream and provide people with skills that they're able to navigate things like stress or trauma, in our conversation today, say climate change, in a way where they don't need a higher level of care. So I'm going to take some time today to walk you all through kind of this concept. I come to you today through experience in dealing with mass destruction and trauma. So for me, it began with Hurricane Katrina, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and then some other disasters that I'll speak to a little bit today, including the Joplin tornado, and then we'll go up to our neighbors up north in Alberta, Canada, and talk about the impact of wildfires. I am hired by the federal government after federally declared disasters to come in and train individuals. So I've seen many different types of communities adapt to what they call the new normal. So if you could show me the next slide.
Angie? Oh, got it. Never mind.
There it is. All right. So we can acknowledge that.
All right, there's a little lag.
There you go. So we can acknowledge that certainly climate change has we've faced many different types of, I would call symptoms now. So when I respond after a hurricane or a tornado, wildfire, 10 years ago, that was a singular event, but now we're really looking at these events as symptoms of something much greater. And the challenge here, and I think all of you can appreciate this, is that yes, we have these symptoms that are quite high profile. What we don't recognize is the slow-moving disaster that is climate change. Here in Louisiana and our tribal communities that work and live close to the Gulf of Mexico acknowledge firsthand that the lower the land sinking and the water rising has been a significant impact on their community. So it's not only the high profile events that you see here on the screen, but it's also the slow moving ones that is a background stressor for communities faced directly with climate change. Next slide, please. And there may be some animation in here, so we might get fancy. So hit that again. Somewhere, maybe. There it is. All right. So in general terms, we are not talking about mental illness. All right. So in responding to disasters, there are really 5 major themes that we talk about when people are recovering from an event. So we think in terms of safety. Are people safe? We want for people to be calm, at least have a sense of safety and calm to be able to make good decisions about their future. Certainly a sense of connectedness. We know that people as humans are gregarious, and that being with others is in of itself healing. And there's a lot of comfort that comes with being with others. After disasters, this idea of rebuilding, the sense of efficacy is important. And finally, this greater idea of hope, that things can be better. We can establish a new identity, a new normal. And certainly, New Orleans is no different than other communities, that in time, things do heal. We arrive at a place where we can make meaning of our trauma and the stress that we've endured because of natural disasters. Next slide. So I want you to think of mental health as a pyramid, but I want to focus only on the bottom 2, because I believe if we do the best job possible in taking care of ourselves, in this case I have self-care circled, and later in my talk I'll talk about informal care amongst each other. I think if we do our best job here, that there's no need for higher levels of service like what I provide as a psychologist. And we found that there are specific programs, examples of programs around this concept of psychosocial. So psychosocial would be the first 2 layers that you see there that help keep people from needing a higher level of care. And what's great about it is it's about taking care of each other and taking care of yourself. Next slide, please. All right, so around self-care, this is an evidence-informed practice that's endorsed and actually created by the federal government and some agencies. The
Is there a big lag?
National Center. Is okay? National
Yeah.
Center for PTSD and the National Center for Traumatic Stress in Children, and of course SAMHSA. And so this is a program that I teach after disasters, and it again focuses on the skills needed in self-care. Next slide, please. All right, as it comes up. All right, here. So this isn't, as I would say, rocket science. These are basic skills that science has found to be important in recovery. And these are skills that are taught just like a classroom. They can be taught individually or in large group settings. But these are the skills that we find that are most needed in recovering from, say, a natural disaster. So problem solving, engaging in positive activities, managing your reactions emotionally. You want to also be able to promote what we call helpful thinking. And finally, and I think most importantly, to build and maintain healthy social connections. Next slide. All right, so problem solving skills. After disasters, there's something that happens in all communities and individuals. We get very myopic. What I mean by that is we get a very narrow focus on possibilities. What you see before you can be overwhelming, whether it's destruction physically or emotionally with the people around you, and we begin to lose options. We don't think as straight as we used to. And so this type of skill, which is taught through Skills for Psychological Recovery, allows individuals to reclaim the ability to make good decisions or best decisions, to kind of almost exercise through brainstorming and problem solving the ability to kind of move forward, or what we would call to remain unstuck after a natural disaster. Next slide. So managing reactions, this is a little more difficult skill. You know, we all are challenged every day in kind of maintaining our composure, whether you're driving or maybe dealing with a difficult coworker or friend or family. But there are certainly adversities that come with natural disasters. And those adversities can really put a lot of stress and trauma on family systems. In our discussion today, certainly tribal communities can experience stress because there's a overall threat to the community. And so learning and practicing how to manage reactions in what we call helpful or certainly healthy ways are important. So teaching things like breathing skills, relaxation, meditation, prayer, all those things are important rather than choosing things that are not good for you, like coping through alcohol or drugs. And so we, again, remind people, reinforce this type of skill after a natural disaster. Next. All right, so we're not talking about positive thinking because the world, sadly, isn't all, as they say, rainbows and unicorns. Helpful thinking allows people to acknowledge what's going on in their lives, in this case, maybe responding to an adverse event, but also with a sense of gratitude, understanding what can be. And so we work with individuals to change the way they look at the world as opportunistic rather than negative, kind of like the Eeyore, if you want to use a Winnie the Pooh kind of reference. So this is a higher level skill, but we work with individuals to look at the world and maybe put the word, a word in their sentences that create the sense of hope. So it could be, yes, you know, my home was flooded. However, I do have the opportunity to rebuild. I still have friends, and things will be better. So it's creating an opportunity along and kind of interwoven with this idea of gratitude. Next. Social connections. People ask me what's the most important, and I think with my work with many different communities, tribal communities included, I think social connections, if there was one to pick, I think social connections provides many of the other skills in some ways. So if I was to choose one, it would be engaging and being connected to other people in the community. With community comes strength, and I don't think anyone would deny that. There's actually very strong research, and you're very welcome to look at this. It's easy reading. A gentleman by the name of Daniel Aldrich. He does studies focused on social capital, and now there's very strong science to say that and to indicate and demonstrate that communities that are stronger before an untimely event like a natural disaster recover much quicker and actually remain and grow much stronger in the long term. Next slide. And so this is just a quick example of what it could look like for an individual. So in this case, this is a social connections map. We're all connected in different ways to different people, and we don't have to even be connected now in person. So through modern technology, the internet, things are possible. So you look down and you see best friend by phone. It could be certainly through Instagram or Snapchat or what people use now to stay connected. Now, with that, I put a little asterisk or a big one. I don't think that's true connectivity, and that's a whole other talk. I think face-to-face, eye-to-eye, knee-to-knee, actually being with people is important. And so after natural disasters, I emphasize the humanity of being connected together. Next slide. So let's move on. So we talked a little bit about self-care, say the 5 skills taught by Skills for Psychological Recovery, SPR, that are important for individuals to kind of remain unstuck. Let's talk about this idea of taking care of each other. It's actually a level that really hasn't been capitalized enough, hasn't been focused on enough. Everyone's out there telling you, don't sleep, don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little, get enough exercise, eat well, and meditate, prayer. And so we've heard almost maybe too much about self-care. We haven't heard enough about remaining connected with others and how to engage with others in a way that's really meaningful. So next slide. So this is just one example that was created in Joplin, Missouri after their EF5 tornado. This really, it's a conversation. It's called How's Your Five, and it's just an example of an opportunity for people to remain connected. After natural disasters, it's very common, and probably in your tribal community as well, if someone asks how they're doing, they're going to answer what? Fine, good. We don't get beyond the fine or good because a lot of people either have a lot of pride. We don't talk about issues concerning mental health or wellness, or oftentimes I find that for the strongest communities, those individuals always believe that there's someone else that needs more than they do. So my neighbor needs more attention. So this is just an example of how people can get past I'm fine or I'm okay. So asking people directly, how's your work? How's your love? And what I mean that by love is how's your connectivity? How's your family? Play taps into the idea of positive social activities, sleep, and then finally eating, or what I would say consumption. So are you taking care of yourself? Are you eating well and also not consuming alcohol as a way of coping? Next slide. So, for example, I have a map here, and I want to start at the top. So Fort McMurray, a handful of years ago, experienced the largest wildfire in Canadian history. And included in that were 5 First Nation communities. In a matter of hours, that town was destroyed and evacuated. I was invited to come up and design a program for that community. And with that, we were able to link together How's Your Five, so that kind of group support, asking each other, how's your five? How's your work? How's your love? How's your play? To remain connected to get past the fine. And we were also to layer in individual skills around these skills that were captured in what I spoke about with SPR, Skills for Psychological Recovery. And that community engaged those well. And to this day, most I think are still working. In fact, How's Your Five is alive and well in many parts of Alberta right now. Joplin, Missouri is actually where How's Your Five began. They combined both and actually used it in schools as well. And then finally, with our United Homa Nation, who I've worked with for the last probably 8 years, both with traditional mental health, but also responding to climate change and the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, they've been actually able to take How's Your Five and adapt it. Could you, next slide, please? And there's an animation, hit it one more time. Let's see if it works. There it is, all right. So the United Homa Nation was able to adapt How's Your Five to their use in their own language, here using the turtle as a sign of wisdom and healing. And they were able to brand this and use it in several different ways. They use How's Your Five now, not only in their wellness center, so that's a center that engages their tribal community in basic physical health, so blood pressure, A1C levels, but they also are able to check in with their general psychosocial wellness by asking their tribal members, how's your five? How's your work? How's your love? How's your family? How's your play? Are you getting out and having enough fun? How's your sleep hygiene? And how's your consumption? How's your eating habits and drinking habits? And so we're very proud to partner with the United Homa Nation in creating this adaptation of How's Your Five. Next slide. And so this is at a powwow a handful of years ago. And so we have one of the dance competitors, one of the younger ones, join us here. But you can see their branding and how they were able to adapt How's Your Five into their community. So it's alive and well down there, and we're proud to have partnered with them. Next slide. So people ask, what do we do? What's, if we should do anything, if we do just one thing, what would be the most important? All the sites that I mentioned Fort McMurray, Joplin, and down in Dulac with the United Home and Nation, they were able to combine three things to create this psychosocial wellness. One was fellowship, gathering together as a community, but also I don't think it's anything unique here in New Orleans, but you have to, if you're gathering people together, you have to gather around food, right? So food, fellowship, and then they also combined all these three communities very effectively in providing information. If I was to recommend one thing for any tribal community in disseminating any type of information, it could be around psychosocial or mental wellness, it could be around physical health, it could be around any other kind of tribal adaptation to climate change, would be to gather people together, feed them, and provide them factual information in a way that allows for questions and also allows for that kind of lingering kind of dessert experience where people really sit down and connect with each other. I saw this in all the three communities that we launched this type of opportunity. So in Fort McMurray, for instance, the format was to bring people in, greet them. They would teach them a skill, actually. They would teach them a skill once a week. They would teach problem solving just for like 5 minutes. Just remind them what problem solving is, how to brainstorm, how to kind of break through being stuck. They would provide then a beautiful meal. I was up there for their Canadian Thanksgiving. And then there's some factual information about what's happening. So that could be factual information around mental health and wellness, or it could be something that's extremely important for the tribal community to know and to respond to. So I think that's about it. What's our next slide? All right, yeah, psychoeducation. So it could be psychoeducation that you provide for people. So you can flip back up. I don't think people need to find me directly. They can always find Angie or Shasta. We're just at 20 minutes. I think I should get a medal for that. I was told 20 minutes and I hit it straight on. High five to me. But I want to hear from you all. What kind of questions might you have about psychosocial wellness that we're talking about this morning?
And while we're waiting for people's questions, and again, throw those into the question box if you have them, just a comment that the presentation is really interesting, and this is from Nikki at ITEP, she's gotten her thinking already about how this can be incorporated into discussions at trainings, departments, program meetings. So yeah, this is great that you're already getting people thinking about how to integrate not just into family and community, but also into our work, which is another kind of community, important community. And here's one from Haley. She says, I think it's important to remember that individuals or communities may be uncomfortable talking about their experiences, feelings, or shame or guilt might occur. How can you make sure you're not making people uncomfortable with the how's your five?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So when we do trainings or in this, we talk about language, and language is extremely important across tribal communities, and that we make adjustments. So for the United Home and Nation, we actually made adjustments for several of the descriptors, and so they actually felt more comfortable with the language. Another kind of initiative I would call is this idea of just being aware around mental health is not being always having to be severe. It's about just being healthy, and that we all go through challenges in being either anxious or sad, but to open up this idea of literacy, so to understand what mental health is and what it isn't. I think people, generally speaking, are misunderstand what mental health is, and it doesn't have to be the severe kind of terrible things that people talk about, where serious medication or hospitalization has to occur. We are all, and I'll be very honest with this, we are all as individuals challenged with mental health issues. There's probably no one on this call, including myself, who either myself or my family, coworkers, or friends are not impacted by mental health. I think it's important for us to honestly open that conversation and to take the chance to talk about it casually. But how are you doing? How are you feeling today? I think we have to get past the stigma of just that conversation, and hopefully understand that it comes with caring. So the question comes because people are really caring about you. So that's my long answer.
We have another comment just saying, this is great, an unexpected topic, and I really enjoyed it. And then a follow-up question, how can we make it less of a negative topic to talk about in groups?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that if you look at and now SPR is available online, you can find the manual. How's Your Five? I can make that available to people. You notice that we're talking about strengths. We're talking about skills. There's nothing in there that talks directly about the big ones around, say, anxiety, depression, or even suicide. It's purposeful because this should be the everyday. It should be the everyday well-being that we maintain either in ourselves or with other people. So we try to keep it around skills-based, and normalize it. These are all skills that people can learn. And with How's Your Five, the skill is asking the question. We all can sense when our coworkers or family are at ease, something's going on with them. We've got to be able to take the time to put down our cell phones or drop what we're doing for a moment and talk to the person who's standing in your doorway, who just needs a little more talking. And sometimes it's just that, just being there for somebody that can make the difference. And
then a few follow-up.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, just a few follow-up comments on that question. And it's a good point that, gender roles, elders, many older folks come from a generation that this is not to be discussed in public, and also in tribal communities, there's lots of other trauma, like trauma from boarding schools or the stress of living in border towns. And so I really think this needs to be tailored to the individual communities, and probably it did take some time to figure out what's going to work best because I can say from my experience in Paula, it's the same thing. Bringing up mental health issues is delicate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not the expert in your communities.
Right.
When I help communities, the first thing I say is, I know what I know, you guys know more, because the official definition of evidence-based practice, people always talk about that. One is best science. So people do the science and the statistics around something that works, like SPR. The other two factors are you all. It's the tribal community and the people, the experience within. All right, so that's 2/3 of the formula. So when I come in and help, I come in only with what I know, and what comes out of it is something absolutely wonderful. Shasta, you mentioned border towns. We're actually using SPR down along the Texas-Mexican border and treating successfully. We're actually to do another research study. We're successfully treating depression in Hispanic women just through teaching skills. We're not doing therapy. We're just teaching skills. And our pilot has actually indicated, or pilot studies indicated, that we're actually successfully treating depression in just teaching skills. So there's a lot of good that can be done at this psychosocial level.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. I continue to learn a lot from you every time we talk. And in terms of the question about trainings, we are really fortunate. We're going to bring Dr. Walker in person later on in 2020. We've received some grant funds. We're going to do a training for staff, and we're going to do community engagement and education with Paula community members, and probably bringing in some of the neighboring communities as well. So we're going to do some on-site, real live skill building in this area, and our intention is to record it so we can share that with this ongoing learning community of ours. So thanks again, Doug. Thanks all for participating in that. Dr. Walker, you don't have to stick around for the rest. We're going to continue on with our webinar. But again, we really appreciate your insights.
All right, thank you all. Have a great day and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Well, that was amazing. What I do want to do is talk to you a little bit about how we're starting to incorporate this at Paula. And so what we have done was take a lot of lessons from Dr. Walker and some other experts in the psychosocial field and start to try to tailor this into Paula's adaptation strategy. And so a portion of the strategies that ended up in Paula's adaptation plan are what we would consider to be psychosocial spiritual resilience strategies. And so it's really taking from the literature, the research, the philosophies around psychosocial resilience, and tailoring it to what we thought might really address some of Paula's major vulnerabilities. And so for us, we categorize those into 4 sort of buckets. The first is providing health education and psychoeducation. So that's part, like Dr. Walker said, facts. Building connection is an area, delivering health and psychosocial first aid resources, and improving communication, because communication can lead to greater levels of safety or feelings of safety. And so we received a grant from the National Indian Health Board that allowed us to really figure out how to put these in the adaptation plan. And there are examples for each of these. There are strategies and approaches under each of these categories. And actually, we're going to share with you at the end here, a suggested reading is going to be this publication we put together about Paula's psychosocial resilience strategies, where we talk about all the approaches that fit under these categories and do a pretty basic overview of the literature, kind of what you just heard from Dr. Walker, but it puts it together in a fairly brief document that could be handy for those of you that are interested in learning more. And it references a lot of the research and literature that Dr. Walker talked about. So to me, this brought a whole new light and way of life into the adaptation world, and one that I think is very human. And it's not all. One thing that Dr. Walker and I have talked about in the past is that tribes are already uniquely resilient in some ways in this area partially because of their cultural traditions that already are fundamentally strong in terms of building connection and keeping folks connected and having folks actually know each other in a community. But there are a lot beyond just psychosocial strategies, a lot of strategies that the cultural traditions in indigenous communities and tribal nations can be employed in terms of assisting with health impacts in general, not just psychosocial. And so I just wanted to mention a few of these. We're just going to talk about a few more types of strategies, and then we're going to talk more about process. But some of the indigenous holistic health traditions embrace biological, psychological, social, and spiritual nature of health. And so the types of things that your community may have been doing for thousands of years can be considered as resilience opportunities. So native diets, talking circles. So for example, there's actually a program in San Diego that is from the San Diego American Indian Health Center. One of their programs is a community program they called Elder Circles, and it meets weekly. And really, it's just it's using the circle conversation as an opportunity for elders to feel less isolated, more connected. It incorporates traditional cultural traditions, and I think has lowered isolation and increased mental well-being, potentially for folks that are participating. So that's just one example of a program that is attempting to build connection. Storytelling to teach positive behaviors, herbal remedies, ceremonies, and prayer. These are, I don't always feel comfortable telling you what the cultural traditions are, and they vary from tribe to tribe. You know what yours are. I'm only shining a light on this so you can look at those cultural traditions through the lens of how do we build upon these strengths that we already have that make our community uniquely resilient, and how can they be incorporated to improve our adaptation. And then on a very different note, there are some more, I would say, hard infrastructure type of improvements or management type of improvements that to the health systems that could be considered as part of health adaptation. So for example, There are public health agencies that are doing quite a bit. We, I think on our last call, our last webinar, we talked about the Oregon Health Authority's Climate Adaptation Plan. One of the things that they're doing is they conduct regular monitoring of climate and health indicators. They monitor the progress on resilience strategies. So there's a whole public health approach to adaptation. And then there's also the actual healthcare systems. And so we haven't talked a lot about that. We haven't talked about hospitals and clinics and the facilities where they are housed and how important. I mean, we've talked a little bit about how there can be interruptions and disruptions in the case of a flood and a fire where folks cannot access certain services, or maybe their facilities have been damaged or the power has gone out. But there are some examples of some good adaptation strategies that can help protect these really important facilities that are critical to protecting community health. And so, for example, in New Orleans, they've spent time retrofitting and strengthening critical facilities like their hospital and healthcare buildings. Others, if they are finding repeated vulnerabilities to these important facilities, might consider relocating hospitals or emergency facilities. They are incorporating power backup systems. And then there's something called a emergency surge procedure, meaning they just want to analyze and better understand what the emergency surge might look like, meaning how to ensure adequate capacity when there is a surge in demand in the instance of something like a disaster, so that they're prepared for the inundation of potential need. Okay. So this is something that we would do in person and spend some time doing it as an exercise, as a small group exercise, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to use the question box. We're going to do this fairly quickly. On the right, this is called Prepare Paula. On the right, you see what we determined through Paula's vulnerability assessment as being their high and medium risk human health impacts. And so we've talked about these in the context of all the different exposures, but for Paula, their biggest risks were heat-related stress, illness, and death, traumatic injury or death from wildfire and storms and flooding, mental health and psychosocial consequences associated with stress and trauma. So there's a whole list there, and really what I'd like to ask you to do is just pick one, and then in the question box, tell us which one you picked, and brainstorm an adaptation strategy just right into that question section. Whatever comes to your mind, just give us an idea. We've talked through now a variety of different kinds of strategies, and we've also showed you the easy tool that has over 130 strategies sitting there as well, and you're free to cheat and look at those. But what strikes you as something that Paula could do to address these medium and high risk human health impacts? I'm curious what people think about off the top of their head.
I think I might have to have the screaming goat get people's attention again. We can put her up here. Okay, there's your cue. And this is really just me also saying, hey, this is my responsibility. Help me with your ideas on how to combat or adapt to any one of these risks on the list.
So, maybe you have an idea for interruptions of drinking water supply or infections due to tick or mosquito-borne illness, respiratory illnesses.
So you guys must be as stumped as I am, because I'm not seeing much. No, I'm not stumped. I have ideas. We've got one here. Fitness activity. So that was from Nikki. And which one of the risks are we focusing on with fitness activity? Oh, the decrease. I see the decrease in fitness activity levels. Yeah. So lucky for us, we have an air-conditioned gym here in Paula. So that's one thing we can do to help folks continue to work on their fitness without having to be concerned about getting overheated in a heat event. Free classes. That's a good one. I like it. Yeah, come and take advantage of our free Zumba or something, or I'll volunteer. People can see me flailing all over the place for free. and come and be entertained.
You know, probably class, like in a heat wave, classes in general, any way you can invite people into the, whatever you use, your designated cooling center would probably be wise.
Yeah, and then of course providing snacks. Snacks is important. But you know, for some of these, we're just trying to do some more community education. So things like the infections due to tick or mosquito-borne illnesses, making people aware of what they can do to reduce the possibility of those vectors ending up in their yards, or you know, like with mosquitoes, a lot of people don't realize that there's standing water in their yards in places they wouldn't expect it to. Here's a suggestion from Mark Junker. He says, life straws can be used to ameliorate drinking water problems. They have them in different sizes to decontaminate water for individuals, families, or even community centers. Yeah, I've heard of those, and that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Mark.
So after this, we'll send around Paula's adaptation plan again, just so you can see what we actually did decide to add in as strategies, and maybe that'll jog some thoughts for you all as you do yours. Well, thank you for participating in that.
We have one more. I'm going to get one more. So from Eileen Nunez, she says, a way to send out mass evacuation warnings or have a team that keeps the community aware of risks during major storms and wildfire events, especially in areas that do not have internet or access to county-wide alerts. Oh, that's incredibly critical, and we're trying to work on something like that here. So thank you for that suggestion. That's a great one.
All right, so let's go quickly for a few more minutes just back into process. So the last time we met, we talked about the first two steps of adaptation planning, which were basically, what are you going to do in your plan, determine objectives and scope, compile a long list of adaptation strategies, and that's what we've been talking about since, is just there's a whole bunch of different kinds of adaptation strategies to choose from. And so the difficult part really of adaptation planning is then to narrow down these the world of potential of amazing ideas of things to do to protect your community. And so step 3 is to evaluate and prioritize a shorter list of adaptation strategies, because we know that your resources are going to be somewhat limited. You can't do everything in the first year. And so the idea is to try to strategize where to do certain things and when. And so how do you apply your limited resources where most effective? And so one of the ways to do that is to rank the strategies. So you might, after step 2, you might end up with a list of 100 strategies that are on the table because you brainstormed with your community and you did research and you pulled from the easy tool, and you're like, wow, well maybe that's too many. How do we space these out? How do we eliminate those that may not be as critical? And so one of the ways, there's a lot of different criteria you can come across as you look through the literature on adaptation planning, but they kind of fall into 2 big areas. One is need. So how important is this? Is there a real vulnerability here to address? So is there a need? And is it feasible? And so this one's hard. Depending on the level of resources and involvement you might have with different departments, you're probably not going to be able to do a full feasibility study on a lot of different adaptation strategies as part of an adaptation plan. What you can do, though, is a high-level consideration of feasibility as part of an adaptation plan, just to generally eliminate those things that are going to sort of have deal breakers involved. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to actually bring up the easy tool really quick and just re-familiarize you with that. As you might remember, this is the adaptation tab, the adaptation strategy tab, and you can filter in all sorts of different ways. Here's all the strategies, here's the type, and one of the first things we asked you to do is to just add in the status. So is this something that you're already doing, or basically are you interested in doing it as a new strategy? And then here's how you can evaluate strategies. This is one way. You're going to have some way to keep track of how you're evaluating strategies. So here's a category for need, and this would just mean you would rank high, medium, or low. Under feasibility, we have a few kind of sub thoughts here. And so one way to look at feasibility is staff capacity or expertise. Another way to look at it is existing funding or likely grant opportunities. And another one to look at it is no major legal, political, natural, or cultural constraints. And so you're kind of looking across here to see whether or not high, medium, or low, what's your capacity here? What's the feasibility here? And so are there any major deal breakers for any of these? Meaning this one's a no-go politically. This one, we just don't have the staff. This one, there's no way to get money for it. That would be good to know at this phase if you do know that. And so generally you can rank high, medium, or low. And so this is, like I said, one way to do that ranking. You would want to involve people in the ranking process. Let me pull back the slides. And so we've done this at Paula, and I've done this with other tribal communities, that we actually involve stakeholders, which improves the viability of the choices that are made. And so ideally you can involve the representatives from departments that may be involved in implementation of these strategies, because without their buy-in, who's to say whether or not these strategies will actually get done? And they may be able to give you some context. Maybe something's already been done. Maybe they have a better idea. Maybe they have a plan in place. And so certainly invite the folks that are going to be doing the work, and then you may invite external stakeholders as well who may be able to leverage their resources or have ideas about other ways to accomplish a goal. And then one other suggestion is, once you have your shorter list, you've sort of narrowed down, and for us at Paula, we eliminated the things that were low need and low feasibility, and we sort of focused on the things that were higher need and higher feasibility. And that helped us. We actually did a poll, an in-person poll at a workshop in terms of asking folks about which strategies they like the best. Once we had a shorter list, then we just checked those back. We double checked it back to ensure that the vulnerabilities that we said were really key, that were high risk in our vulnerability assessment, had been sufficiently addressed. Step 4 is to just organize these strategies into an action plan. And so not only do you want to end up with a list of strategies that could be lengthy and maybe even a ranking, you ideally will end up with something that actually helps you manage the process, like helps you transition into the process of implementation. And so that means you might outline things like responsible departments, time frame, the status, and what partners or resources might be available to you, including funding opportunities. Doing this little bit of extra work takes it from a list of strategies that are going to potentially sit on a shelf to something that's really potentially actionable and has folks that are responsible for it and timelines involved. And so to quickly go back to your easy tool, if you'd like to use this is just an attempt to help you through that process as well. Over here, you've got a section for planning details where you can look at time frame, and all you can do is just kind of put an X on a year that you'd like to have a goal for completion of an adaptation strategy. You can mark a responsible department. You can include involved departments, but it's good to share who might be the lead, because then you can check in with those folks and make sure that they are going to accept the responsibility. And then looking at things like potential resources and partners. If you have information about an estimated budget or funding needs, you can add that information as well. But for us, when I've done adaptation plans, this might be as much information as you might have time and resource to do at this stage in planning. And then finally, step 5, just like before, you can synthesize and present the results of all of this work, including your strategies and an action plan for those strategies, which I put in a table, into an actual report. It doesn't have to be in a written report. I've seen it done in a video as well. I've seen it done in a presentation and slides. There's ways to be creative about it. We have provided, if you go to tribalclimatehealth.org, the same place we put the vulnerability assessment report for Paula as a Word document that's editable, we've also placed Paula's adaptation strategy. So you are free to use that template and adapt it for your own needs. You can use the outline, you can use the references. You obviously have to do a lot of customizing. You don't want to just take the adaptation strategies that Paula chose, but feel free to use that format if it's helpful to you. And so that's going to wrap it up for today. I do want to point you back to the workshop companion form. that we provided to you earlier on in this training. It's also available to you through the functionality here on the web of the GoToWebinar. You can pull that down. Just take a few minutes to complete section 4, and that just helps you to keep some thoughts and notes as we've just talked about adaptation planning, so that when you get to this point in the process, you remember some of the things we've talked about. And for next time, we're going to meet on December 17th. It'll be our last session, and we're going to focus on implementation. So basically going from planning to now implementation and then evaluation of that adaptation plan. And we'll close it off together as a group. And so we have one last suggested reading for you. I mentioned that we have, Shasta and I, with Dr. Doug Walker's help, developed a publication that basically is translated loosely to When Our Hearts Are Happy, a tribal psychosocial climate resilience framework. And so that's sharing with you Paula's psychosocial framework, if that's of interest to you and you want to dive deeper into how a tribe is in translating that information for their own adaptation needs. Anything, have you seen any other comments, Shasta, or any other wrapping up comments from you?
No, I think we're all good and finishing on time. So I just appreciate everybody being here in a busy December and look forward to seeing you for our final webinar on December 17th.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.